What is the best "you've messed with the wrong person" moment you've seen? Story 1. This is low-key, but I enjoyed it. During my first week at a white-collar job, my first job, we were in the middle of a department-wide meeting with about 17 coworkers and supervisors. The person leading the meeting asked a question to no one in particular, and several of us answered. My answer differed from the rest. One guy turned to me and said, "Let's leave these questions to the people who actually have a master's degree, shall we?" I looked at him and said, "I have a master's degree." The room went silent, except for one guy who loudly oohed. I had given the correct answer to top it off. Story 2. I was drunk as hell in a party bus for my cousin's 21st birthday. I was being a complete ass because I was letting my brother, who had issues with someone, get me worked up over his drama. We got into a huge brawl outside one of the stops, and I decided to take a shot at one of the guys I didn't like. I hit him with everything I had. I mean everything. I literally broke my hand on his face. He got up, looked at me, and calmly said, "You just messed up." He was right. Story 3. Watching my 72-year-old father beat out a guy who tried to steal my mom's purse. If I've learned anything growing up in rural Midwestern America, it's that your battle with the wrong senior citizen might be your last. How tough are you really when up against an 80-year-old farmhand turned farm owner who worked manual labor their whole life, has chain-smoked unfiltered Lucky Strikes since they were 14, hasn't consumed a liquid other than whiskey for the past 30 years, has healed being attacked by a bull with booze and some plants he picked in the woods, has so many medical ailments that doctors are placing bets on his lifespan, and can still very coherently regale the stories of their time fighting wars overseas. There are more of these people scattered throughout the middle of nowhere in the USA than one might think. I found a knife-wielding homeless guy before. That is less intimidating than your average rural Terminator. Story 4. A yuppie frat boy in an economics course I took during my freshman year got caught cheating. At my university, we all signed a contract agreeing to the honor code policies, and cheating is an automatic expulsion. But the professor decided to be nice and was just going to give the kid a 0 on the exam. The frat kid didn't think that was enough, and it turned into an argument. The kid started saying how in his family is at the university and how none of this matters because he'll just pull some strings. Long story short, our professor is actually close friends with the chancellor of our school. Not only did the kid get expelled from school, but they somehow got him into legal trouble as well for some of the comments he made in class that day. I don't know what was said that could have been used against him, but the kid ended up in some deep mess. Story 5. There was this guy who was part of our group in college. He was an ass, but he was one of the guys' brothers, so he hung out with us a lot. Whenever he would get drunk, he would try to pick fights. We would just shake it off and ignore him. One of the guys hosted a pretty big New Year's party. As it goes, this dude got drunk and tried to pick fights again. People were getting uncomfortable. There was one guy at a party who was about 6'4" and built like a tank who was just not having it. He waited to be confronted and then immediately carried the guy outside and threw him down some stairs, breaking his leg. He stopped picking fights after that. Story 6. I didn't witness it, but when I worked for AT&T, a gentleman and his wife came in because his son's iPhone 6 was bent, so they wanted to get him a new phone. How did it get bent? Some turd held the boy up while he was walking home from school, taking his money and his phone. Both of his parents were retired police officers, and his father trained in SWAT tactics and hand-to-hand combat. The son went home empty-handed and was initially scared to tell his parents because the thief told him he knew where he lived and threatened him. His parents eventually got him to tell them what happened. The thief was hanging out at a laundromat near their home when the robbery took place. The dad called his cop buddies, who immediately rolled up to the laundromat along with the dad, where they apprehended the guy who still had the phone in his pocket. It got bent during the ensuing scuffle. The dude stole from the wrong kid. The kid was very polite and kind while in the store. He seemed pretty shaken up. I was glad for him that his dad had his back. Story 7. There was a guy who played drums all the time on the city strip in Hawaii. He was a nice guy who didn't talk much, but people would wave to him and throw him a few dollars. One day, a drunk tourist decided to mess with his drums. The drummer gave him many chances to walk away, but the tourist decided to punch him. In just one punch, the drummer knocked him out. My friend and I watched as the tourist was helped by paramedics, and it looked like he had a serious injury. Story 8. We had a vendor who came once a week and had a habit of crushing people's hands when shaking them. I warned the new guy in the sales department to be careful when shaking the vendor's hand. A few days later, the vendor shows up, put his hand out to the new guy with a smile, and went in for the At first, everyone was smiling, but then the new guy stopped pumping his hand and looked the vendor in the eye. The vendor's smile melted off his face, and he had a pained expression as he dropped the new guy's hand like it was lava. I pulled the new guy aside and asked him how he did it. He said that he had driven a tow truck for 10 years and changed thousands of flat tires with just hand tools. "Nobody crushes my hand," he said. Story 9. There was a family in my neighborhood that fostered many Asian boys. One was in my class, and a couple were older. They lived 3 houses down from my best friend, and he became very close with the boys in our class, whom we can call John. In retrospect, it seems obvious that while he was in our class, He was much older and was probably placed with us so he could catch up with his education. He was a great guy. When we were in high school, a kid from the class ahead of us took a special interest in picking on my friend, constantly messing with him. It escalated to him challenging my friend to fight and finally showing up in our neighborhood. Eventually, he shows up one day and confronts my friend in the street. John witnessed this, came out to challenge the bully, and utterly and completely destroyed him, despite the kid being 50 pounds heavier. He was one of those big red-headed kids. The much smaller, much faster Asian kid beat the hell out of him before he knew what happened. It was like watching a Bruce Lee movie live. Afterwards, my friend just walked up to me and said, "Well, I guess that's the end of my bully's name problem." It was. Another time, a different kid was fostered by the same family and was getting picked on relentlessly by some upperclassmen. They were using racial slurs and running him off the road with their cars when he rode his bike around. Finally, he had enough one day at school and got into it with the ringleader of the bullies. Through broken English and a lot of Vietnamese swearing, he agreed to meet them at the only gas station in town after school to settle things. The kid showed up to the confrontation and removed a glass bottle from his bag, promptly broke it, and brandished the jagged glass like a knife. Cue the bully immediately running to his car and taking off while the kid said that this is how you settle your honor in his country, or something to that effect. No one messed with him anymore after that incident. Story 10. Most of this I learned secondhand as it occurred. When I was younger, my dad bought some oil field royalties, percentage ownership of what is produced. They gave a check each month for a few $100. Well, as time went by, the checks began to dwindle and then stopped. At this point, he began to look into the company that operated the oil field and received a significantly less satisfactory answer. At this point, they really should have just given him the checks each month, because he proceeded to look into the company and peel back a metric ton of fraud and other deceptions. Over the course of a 7-year litigation case, my dad figured out exactly how they were committing fraud, and after working with a few lawyer friends, he hit them with a slap of God in court, which removed their operator's license for oil wells, and promptly thereafter, they went out of business. He ruined a $50 million company because they tried to screw him out of a few $100 a month. Story 11. I was in a bar in Missouri on the outskirts of Jeff City that had a nice mix of customers with various backgrounds. College students, city dwellers, country folk, etc. There was a group of white, preppy 20-something guys acting and the king of the dudes marched up to the bar and tried flirting with the bartender. She smiled and listened to him, but clearly didn't care. He kept spewing stupid pickup lines while his friends egged him on. Next to him was a thin black guy drinking a Cosmo. After the last failed pickup line, the thin black guy said, "She really doesn't give a flying mess about your pickup lines. She's just doing her job." King Dude didn't like that and started talking shit about the black guy, saying immature, stupid things. The thin black guy kept his cool, sipping his Cosmo. King Dude called him a gay slur for drinking a Cosmo and continued on a homophobic rant. The thin black guy finished his drink and turned to King Dude. King Dude said, "What are you going to do? The thin black guy uppercut him in the throat. While King Dude tried to comprehend what was going on, his friends came up behind him. The thin black guy kicked King Dude into his friends. The bartender told the flock of dudes to get the hell out. They helped King Dude to his feet and left. The thin black guy went to the bar to pay for his drink, and the bartender said, "Thanks, Marcus." Marcus replied, "No problem, see you later," and walked out to his car and drove off. That was the last time I saw Marcus. Story 12. My grandpa was a nom-vet, a really nice guy, kind of your typical portly boomer type. Well, one day we were at the mall, and on the way back to the car, some frat dude-looking guy was walking along singing a dirty song composed mostly of profanity. My grandpa told him, "Hey, there are kids around here. Watch your mouth." The guy sized up my grandpa, saw he was kind of old and had a belly, and decided he was going to prove to his two buddies how tough he was by bowing up an old man. He flexed his cut-off-sleeved arms, jutted his barbed wire tribal neck tattoo chin out, and kind of tried to chest bump my grandpa. My grandpa suddenly got into this perfect boxer stance and just rocked this guy in the gut. The frat dude went down on his knees, winded, and my grandpa said, "I said, watch your mouth, boy." The guy started to get up and said, "Screw you." But my grandpa put a left hook into his face and a right punch into his neck under his ear, and the dude went down spread eagle and out cold. My grandpa stepped over him, walking towards his two buddies who had booked it. We got in the car and he made me promise not to tell my mom. Story 13. This guy, well, his subcontractors, does a lot of work for my local smallish city or county. About $5 million worth of work last year. He has an autistic son and is a pretty nice, if super cheap, guy. This other subcontractor was kind of a piece of shit and was one of those, I'll say whatever I want because it's free speech. On a second job or third job, the boss stops by to check on stuff and drop off some materials. The sub starts running his mouth about stupid stuff and eventually starts telling jokes. The boss says, "You know I have an autistic son, right?" This was his perfect response. "Yep, I did. Sorry about your bad luck." The dude hasn't done a single job for the city since. No other contractors will even toss him some work. I'm pretty sure his business is going under. He did bad work anyway. Story 14. This happened to me in my senior year of high school. My twin sister had just gone dumped by her gross boyfriend, never liked him. He made her life miserable and spread rumors about her. She didn't want to do it with him, so he dumped her. I was minding my own business, walking through the packed cafeteria when he said, "There goes her of a sister," loud enough for those at nearby tables to hear. At this point, I had enough of his mess toward my sister, and now he was dragging my name into the mud. "What did you call me?" I said. A literal hush falls over the cafeteria. The football team on the other side of the table stands up, ready to fight. I worked with one of them at Pizza Hut, so I knew they'd have my back. He says, "You heard me." This part happens in slow motion in my memory. "That's what I thought you said." And I hit him with all the force I had across his greasy face. I left a handprint from his ear to his nose. The whole cafeteria gasps. He looks surprised at first, then embarrassed, then fuming mad. He looks for the nearest teacher. There's no way they didn't see or hear what happened. "Aren't you going to do anything?" He yelled across the room at them. "Nope," they said in unison. "Unless you want to go to the office with her for harassment." Gotta love the female gym teacher. He never spoke a word about me or my sister again. I became a minor school celebrity for a while. The football team came over to check on me and offered to finish the job. It was a good day. Story 15. Back in the 1980s, I took a commercial tour in Africa. A local cop in an obscure town decided that accusing a group of American tourists of illegally photographing a police station would be a good way to ingratiate himself with the local commandant. So he arrested us and hauled us off to see the commandant, who was not amused. To save face, he agreed to let us go after we swore we wouldn't sell pictures of the police station to American newspapers. It didn't hurt that we, on the tour leader's advice, were loudly demanding that he call the American ambassador. We learned later that things did not go well for the local cop. The tour organizer was a European who was best friends with a man considered a national hero in that country. The organizer had contracted with a local company to handle the logistics of the tour. The local company was owned by the national hero's brother. The local guide made a call. A national hero made a call. The commandant understood which side his bread was buttered on. Story 16. One night, my dad's garage was broken into by some kids. We were in there working on some designs for the ducts of a house being built when a kid knocked on the garage door. We went out to help the one kid, whom we assumed was alone at the time, on the other side of the house from our detached garage. My dad went around to the garage to get his set to help out and found a different kid walking with his 40-ounce bottle of booze. That kid got laid flat pretty quickly. I heard this interaction and shuffled my way over, abandoning the kid on the side of the house facing the big street. We're on the corner. I saw the out-of-control kid on the ground in front of the garage door with a bottle and knew something was up. I went back around the house to see if they were connected, and the kid with a bike had taken off down the street on the bike that we were really just going to fix the brakes on. Knowing that kid 1 was gone and figuring there were 2 at this point, Dad headed into the house. Again, the garage is detached but not far, and found yet another kid fumbling around in the bedroom where his keys were. He came back out of the house and told me to make sure they didn't go anywhere. Both of them were out cold at this point, and he was off to chase down the kid on the bike. He ended up chasing kid 1 in his van down the street near a hardware store and bumping his tire from behind to kill his balance and knock him to the ground in the parking lot. I would say that was a night of violent justice. Story 17. I was on a cruise around Europe 6 years ago. When we got to Switzerland, we stayed in a campground with a bomb shelter for a bar. They had on-site security, which was also a division of the police force. I can't remember exactly how that works, but we met a really nice security guard named Sven, who told us his nickname was White Tyson, WT for short. It was party night, and we were having a bloody good time when we noticed there was a bit of a scuffle on the floor. One guy, let's call him Hero, was the main antagonist. He apparently slapped a girl on the dance floor who was refusing his advances, which quite a few of us took exception to. The girl he was trying it on with was the sister of one of the guys on our tour. After some push and shove, everyone was told the night was over and it was time to go to our rooms. White Tyson was told to keep an eye on Hero as he continued to work himself into a rage. Eventually, Hero lost the plot and started kicking and punching the wall in his room before deciding WT was next, who at this point was standing right outside his front door, and started mouthing off with some threats. WT decided enough was enough and told him to back away or he would use force to subdue him. Hero declined his offer and continued to advance towards him. WT took a step back and threw back a few of his own. Hero's Kontiki was over that night. He lost 3 of his teeth and broke his jaw. We didn't see him again. But in the morning, when the girl's brother saw WT, all he had to say was, "I did this for your sister. I hope she's okay." I hope you've learned your lesson, Hero. Story 18. My uncle is a 5'4" little ball of concentrated muscle, spit, and vinegar packed so tightly that it makes his temper super dense and hot, like a massive star. On top of that, he has a bit of a drinking problem. I've seen him walk into fights with everyone around us thinking he was going to die. only to see him victoriously dragged away in handcuffs after putting some poor sap in the hospital. Needless to say, he's in prison quite a bit, and from how often he doesn't make parole, I assume he fights a lot in there too. Story 19. My mom told me this story about my dad when they were young or newly married. I don't think an adult could necessarily get away with this in American helicopter parent culture these days, but this happened in the late 70s. My dad was a restaurant manager and had to fire a high school kid. He lived in the same neighborhood as my parents and would often see my dad when he and his friends were driving to school. They would flip my dad off and yell things at him. One day, my dad got sick of it all. He drove to their school, found them trying to park, used his car to block them, and went up to the kid's window and told him, "If you ever flip me off again, I'm going to rip that finger off and shove it up your ass." The kid stopped flipping him off. Story 20. In my high school class, there was a bully who liked to pants other guys, trying to get both their pants and boxers off, leaving the victim's private parts exposed. After gym class, the bully decided to target a guy named Dan. Dan was a brilliant yet awkward guy who was definitely on the spectrum. He was tall and gangly, making him an easy target. However, Dan had a secret. He had just received his black belt in jiu-jitsu and was fully capable of defending himself. You probably see where this is going. Anyway, the bully approached Dan and pulled his shorts down, along with his boxers. Dan was left standing there, exposed, with the whole class laughing at him. But Dan calmly stepped out of his shorts and put the bully into a crazy hold. Once he got the bully to squeal, he flipped him over on his back onto the bleachers. The gym teacher saw the whole thing. The bully suffered a broken leg, missed his entire senior year of athletics, and was suspended. Dan received a warning not to break any more legs. Story 21. One day, while riding the bus home from school, a bunch of freaks in the back were throwing food and other junk around. A quiet, overweight kid sat in front of them, minding his own business. One of the freaks thought it would be funny to shove an old sandwich in his face and call him Fat Boy. The quiet kid stood up and knocked him out with a single punch, grabbed his bag, and walked up to the front of the bus. He got off at his stop as if nothing had happened. Story 22. In the 7th grade science class, there was a bully who was more like a bully's henchman. He said something about a quiet kid's mother, who was actually dead. It turned out that the quiet kid had been studying boxing. "What did you say about my mom?" he asked, and he threw 2 straight punches at the bully's henchman. The bully's henchman was so shocked that he did nothing and took the punches to his face. I don't think the quiet kid got in trouble, as it happened before the teacher came in.